I'm Dr. Seema Desai, and this is the Joy First method, where high achievers stop white knuckling their way forward and start building something that's actually theirs. Let's get to it. Back in 2017, 2018, my husband was working 36-hour shifts, which meant that I was flying solo. During the day, I'd lug my dental chair from nursing home to nursing home, working through lunch to get done in time to pick up my kids from Montessori school. And I would rush home with them to try to get a meal on the table before anyone melted down, which is a pretty tall order when you've got two toddlers. I'd rush through dinner. I'd rush through bath time, through bedtime. Every day, a race against the clock, just to wake up and do it all over again. And when the pressure got too heavy, I'd snap at my kids to be quiet and to leave me alone. When all they wanted, all they really needed, was to be seen and loved by a mom who believed they were worthy of her time. And those moments were just laden with such heavy guilt. I knew that that's what I wanted, that's what I needed, was to be with my kids in a way that was present and loving. But I just didn't know how to give it to them or to myself. So the guilt became something that I carried inside the bag that held my folding dental chair, something I lugged around every single day, not knowing where or how to put it down. There were days I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. And those moments in the mirror, they weren't my lowest point. It was actually, my lowest points were something quieter and in some ways even harder. Because when I finally forced myself to look at my reflection, I didn't just see a tired dentist and a struggling mom. I saw a woman who spent her whole life chasing happiness in titles and achievements, in everyone else's approval, and it was costing me in my relationships, my health, and my own sense of peace. Something had to change. And in that moment of clarity, that something had to change, I had no idea what that something was. I went looking and I didn't know consciously what I was looking for. It was a bunch of trial and error. One of the biggest questions that I get when people hear about my work and my transition from being a doctor and seeing patients to doing what I do now, they're like, how did you even do that? What are the steps? What would that even look like? And my honest answer is I chose to follow my joy. In the last episode, we talked about the difference between happiness and joy. And hopefully you've had a moment to really clarify for yourself what are just some of the ways that you've been pursuing and chasing happiness like I was, instead of choosing your joy. I talked in the last episode too about how joy is not something that we inherently know what that looks like or feels like, but it comes in trial and error. Joy looks different for different people at different points in their lives. What creates an access point to your joy, again, joy isn't something that you get, it's something that you access. It's something that already exists within you. But what allows access to your joy at one point in your life may not in a different part of your life or in a later part of your life. As kids, we're more innately connected to our joy. And we've all seen it. Babies just belly laughing because mommy made a funny face or because they heard a sound that felt a little weird and funny. They don't seize up and shrink and compact down. They laugh and they explore. Joy is just inherently the state of babyhood, of childhood. And as the years go by, we sort of internalize what is quote unquote acceptable, the roles, the rules, the responsibilities. You know, in my family, we do this, and this is the way we get approval. This is the way approval leads to feeling safe or feeling heard or validated. And so as those learned behaviors come about into our psyche, for me, for example, it was people pleasing. That was my way of staying safe, my way of protecting myself from anyone getting angry at me or making me feel unworthy or like I wasn't doing enough, is if I could just overachieve, if I could just people please, then that would make people happy, that would make me happy, and then until the next, thing came along, right? And that just pretty much sums up why it gets to be hard for people as we get older to access our joy. So the good news is we haven't lost it. We're still, we have that connection, and we just need to cultivate it. So how do we cultivate it? One of my favorite ways to talk about this is through the 3 C's. The 3 C's of joy are ways that we can connect with it and start to cultivate it so that it becomes stronger, so that it becomes the place from which we live and lead a little bit easier. That's how we maximize our drive, our ambition, and nurture our relationships, strengthen our communication without compromising our well-being, is how much joy are we able to feel in day-to-day moments. So the 3 C's, what are they? They're pretty straightforward and pretty simple, although they may not always be easy. So the 3 C's are creativity, community, and connection. We'll start with creativity. It's pretty simple. Creativity is self-explanatory, right? Anything with art or music or dance is creativity. Listening to music, playing music, writing music, creating any kind of art in any way, shape, or form. Even this podcast for me is a shape of creativity. That creativity is essential. And if you're telling yourself, well, I'm not really a creative person, or creativity isn't something that my job really requires. In fact, it's not necessary at all. It might even be a hindrance. I'm going to challenge you a little bit to think about ways that might not be true. First of all, creativity, we have that capacity as human beings. We're all creative. Some of us we have easier access to it. We're just the more creative type. Others rely more on data. It's more algorithm. It's more rational, logical, step-by-step thinking. But that doesn't mean that we're not creative. In fact, innovation, especially in data-driven fields, especially where standards and procedures and protocols are in place, creativity, when combined with that structure, is what drives innovation. It's what drives things like medicine, the practice of medicine to improve, technology to improve. That is problem solving and solution seeking improved, is when we can build in creativity. Really magical things can happen. Really surprising and unexpected things can happen. We can optimize our outcome. In fact, I have this one client who is a practicing physician, is routinely in life or death situations with children. And I will never forget the time that they came to a session and they were like, "You will never guess what happened. We've had this problem with, how to manage putting patients in beds, because there's only so many beds, there's only so many rooms. And when things get full, we've got to figure out a way to deliver care to the people who need it while operating under the constraints of there's only so many beds and only so many rooms." And it was so interesting to see and hear their reflections on how they invited creativity into their work, and how much all the other pearls and gifts that them getting creative about how to solve this problem brought. It was really, really special to see. So that is the first C of joy, creativity. The next C of joy is community. Community is also self-explanatory. It is groups of people coming together for a specific cause. Now, it may be family, right? You have a sense of belonging. This is your genetic family, or your friend family, this place where you maybe all went to college together, or you went through a specific event together. Maybe you all have kids the same age. Community can be in things like your alma mater. you can find, like my husband went to Texas A&M. I didn't go to a big school. I didn't have that sense of belonging. But every time we visit the campus, every time we go to a football game, you feel it. You feel that sense of belonging coming together in a way that's really special. And I think that it's what makes us feel less alone. It makes life a little bit sweeter and a little less stressful when we can find community. Community is also in things like coming together for a purpose bigger than ourselves. Things like spiritual growth, personal development, a philanthropic cause. So when you can come together and find purpose beyond just your everyday nitty gritty of life, when you can lend a helping hand, when you can create that sense of belonging and safety, it is such a source of joy. It is what allows us to feel whole, worthy, capable, and like our lives are actually meaningful. At the root of creativity and community, however, is connection. Okay. That's the third C of joy, connection. Connection, yes, to people, places, things outside of us that we like or love or care about. But at the root of all of it is connection to self. Connection to self. So what does that mean? Well, connection to self is connection to joy. That is your access point. Because without connection to self, creativity just becomes one other thing on your to-do list. Community, that just becomes noise. It becomes an obligation. So without that connection to self, without that sense of joy, all of the rest just becomes our source of stress. So connection to ourselves is where that joy lives. It's infinite. It is shareable, expansive. It is deeply, deeply healing, restorative, nurturing. And it is the source of really up-leveling how we live life without compromising. It's the source of our spiritual growth as well, which is so critical. In this day and age, there's a lot of contention around, whether to follow religious practices or not follow religious practices. What, people want to assign a meaning or assign a set of beliefs to what it means to quote unquote be religious or to practice with a specific religious faith. But what I'm talking about here is spirituality, our essence, that divine energy that's gifted to us all. That's what makes us feel alive is what I'm talking about. The essence of what it means to be alive in this time and place as a human being. That is where that joy is deeply intertwined with our spirituality. And so what does it mean to connect with ourselves? There's lots of ways to do that. Creativity and finding community, the right community, are very straightforward, simple ways. Like if you find something that you enjoy, if you don't like playing piano, for example, I grew up, I wanted to play piano because every other kid around me played piano. My family didn't have money for that. And so I just sort of told myself that when I grow up, if I could learn to play piano, I think there was some sort of chasing happiness there, arrival fallacy there of like, I'll have made it. I'll have been one of these people. If I can give my kids piano lessons, that's something that I quote unquote should do. Well, so when we got piano lessons, we had a lovely teacher. His name was Alex. Oh my gosh, I loved him. He was so patient. The truth is though, we are just not inherently a musical family. We enjoy listening to music, playing music, not so much. And that was just a point of recognition where each of us, we have to go through and say, all right, this is how some people experience creativity. They play instruments, but is that how I can tap into my connection and myself, my joy? No, for me, it's writing. It is thinking deeply about a problem. That's how I experience creativity. Another way that I experience creativity that I absolutely love is dancing to silly music. If you have not heard of Sarah Maddock, she's fantastic. I don't know her personally, but we follow each other on Instagram. I love her because her music is, number one, it's clean, but it's also just so silly and so joyful. She sings about like talking to a cat or ferrets holding carrots or finding a slug on your rug or, wearing a yellow duck sweater. It's just so silly. And I love to listen to her songs, especially before like a big meeting, or if I'm, finding myself in a place where I don't really feel like cooking dinner or I don't really feel like folding laundry. Throwing on some silly music and getting into my body, moving my body. That's another way we find creativity. That's what's meaningful to me. That's a way that I make creativity feel more genuine, more authentic, and not like something that I quote unquote should do because that's what an accomplished person does, or that's what a good parent does, is give their kids piano lessons. My kids find creativity in other ways. My son loves working on bicycles. He really loves the mechanics of it. I can see how much joy he gets from just being in there and figuring things out with his friends. So the three C's, which brings me to another point, the three C's can overlap with one another. When you go for a walk, for example, you're moving your body, that counts in the creativity bucket, any movement. When you get curious about your movement and then you do it in connection with yourself and with someone else in community, it's always a little bit sweeter when you can take a walk with a friend and have a great conversation. So these are ways where the three C's of joy, they are simple. Often they don't cost very much or anything at all. But the reason it's difficult is that we are running in a world that is so fast. It's faster than we're actually wired to be as human beings. And so taking time to back off, taking time to breathe, that's another way I love to connect with myself, is just through the breath. There is an inherent sense of like, oh, but if I back off, then I'm falling behind, then I'm being less productive, then I am not operating to my fullest, right? Especially for recovering overachievers, for people pleasers. We tell ourselves, if I back off, then I'm not going to get this work done in time. And then so-and-so is not going to be happy with me. And then I'm going to have to deal with that. And, we go down these rabbit holes. That is our inner guards talking, our ego talking. But when we slow down, we lean into these three C's, we allow joy to take the wheel. We allow our inner guides, or if you follow a different paradigm, God, the universe, divinity, creation, whatever you want to use here. I'm going to use guides because that's how I refer to them in my book, the guides and the guards. But when we lean into our inner guides, when we're guided by joy, oftentimes we're not even necessarily taking a step back. We're just taking a step off to the side or in a different direction. Think of it as like when you open up Apple Maps, for example, you have to tell Apple Maps where you want it to direct you to. When you put in joy, then the way to get there is very different than if you put in happiness. What both happiness and joy, what joy requires you to do, not so much happiness. Accessing your joy means that you have to accept where you are in the moment. You have to accept the situation as it is, like it or not. So that's another reason that joy becomes, it feels harder. And our response is to just throw it away. I don't have time for that. That's not going to work. That is baloney, whatever your brain is telling you. I have a client, a very specific client that I'm thinking of, that I'm holding with so much love and compassion right now, because one of our very first sessions together, she was like, just so caught up in what would happen if I just slow down enough to take a single breath, if I just slow down enough to walk away from the situation, to reconsider how I want to handle it. It felt very unsafe for her and very unfamiliar. That's why it felt unsafe, was because it was unfamiliar. I might be talking in circles now. Hopefully you're tracking with me. That is the interesting thing about doing a solo show, is there's not another human being there to kind of play back and carry the conversation forward. But when we are able to give ourselves the space to set our internal GPS to joy, yes, it's unfamiliar. It's an unfamiliar route, and it might feel scary. It might feel not safe enough to proceed, but just take baby steps. So this client that I was just referring to, what what I was asking her to consider was, what would it be like to take a breath? What they did instead, all on their own, was to find ways to laugh. And that essentially gives us the same multiple entry points to the same end story, to their joy. They found what worked for them and let what unfolded unfold. And of course, I was not surprised but certainly thrilled to hear that the challenge that they were facing in front of them just got a little bit sweeter, a lot less stressful, and they actually built better communication and better outcomes because they took a moment. So I want to encourage you guys to find ways that the 3 C's will work for you. Creativity might look very different for you today on a day where maybe you have a lot to do versus a day when you're off and it's the weekend, or when you're on vacation. But it can look like gardening. It can look like cooking. It can look like going for a walk or just dancing to a silly song. It can be done in community, finding people that you want to spend time with, even if it's just for 5 minutes. We often tell ourselves that if it's an all or nothing approach. And guys, joy isn't all or nothing. Even if you can invite just a couple of moments of joy into your day on a consistent basis, magic happens. It all unfolds completely differently if you just start to focus on joy. Okay, guys, I, like always, am wishing you moments of levity, moments of joy, moments of peace in now and in everything that you do today. May you always be connected to your joy. One thing I will say is, if you want more content and you don't want to miss an episode, and if you haven't done it already, join my community, grab up your spot on my email list. I send out emails every other week, and they have content that isn't always offered on the podcast or on social media. So if you're looking for more support, more insight, more space to do the inner work that makes the outer work meaningful and sustainable, sign up for the Joy First Method newsletter. You can do that at drseemadesai.com/sign up. The link will also be in the show notes. Okay, guys, until next time. If something in today's episode landed for you, great, sit with it and then share it. Send it to the founder who's running on fumes, the leader who's got everything and still feels like something's missing, the friend you keep meaning to check on. That's how this work travels, from person to person, the way real change always does. Follow the show so you never miss an episode. And if it's been valuable, leave a review. It helps more people find their way here. I'll see you next time.